Good evening, and welcome to Doctorpiece Theatre. My name is Dr. Dennis Business. And tonight some short stories have made their way across my desk. And I feel as though it is my responsibility to bring such short stories to you. And so I shall. The Big Cruton. The biggest crouton I ever saw was bigger than me. It took 3 guys to lift it, so if you and your friend wanted to lift this crouton, you'd still need another guy. That's how big this crouton was. The guy who owned it kept it in a shed, wrapped in velvet, and if you wanted to see it, he would take you there, but it would cost you $15 cash down. And you'd have to be drunk, so you wouldn't know where he kept the crouton. They called him Old Darrell, although he was only 18 years old. It was one of those names folks hoped he'd grow into, sort of like Hank, you know? Old Darrell loved his crouton so much that it worried his girlfriend, Hazel, a name that no one ever grows into. And one day she said, "You know, Old Darrell, I think you love that old crouton more'n you love me." "Well, there's the door," he said, and at that he motioned at a large hole in the wall that he intended to build a door into as soon as he got some tools. So, the fight ended in a compromise. He decided to buy her a humidifier. And as fate would have it, as they were out that night, some kids, I guess about your ages, your sizes, smells, and hair color and ethnocentric backgrounds. They were out in the midst of a Rango Tango devil-may-care spree, and they happened upon the crouton shack. They broke right in. They claim they were looking for Mother's Day gifts, but I don't believe that. Because as soon as they saw that crouton, they had their little Swiss Army knives poised, and they started hacking at that beautiful crouton just to garnish their selfish salads. And then they skedaddled as mysteriously as they came. They were kids a lot like you. And by the time Old Darrell came home with that humidifier under his right arm, that crouton, once mighty and towering, was now the size of, say, a Rubik's Cube. And if you were there, in the middle of that Monday night, you might have heard the sound of crying. Male crying, the rarest kind. Nowadays, Old Darrell, well, he looks his name. 'Cause people don't come to see that crouton anymore. Just teenage girls who want to use it for earrings. And when he and his woman aren't buying lottery tickets, he's out looking at that shack, just remembering. If I Ran the Zoo by Dr. Seuss. "It's a pretty good zoo," said young Gerald McGrew, "and the fellow who runs it seems proud of it too. But if I ran the zoo," said young Gerald McGrew, "I'd make a few changes. That's just what I'd do. The lions and tigers and that kind of stuff they have up here are now not quite good enough. You see things like these in just any old zoo. They're awfully old-fashioned. I want something new. So I'd open each cage. I'd unlock every pen, let the animals go, and start over again. And somehow or other, I think I could find some beasts of a much more unusual kind. A 4-footed lion is not much of a beast. The one in my zoo will have 10 feet, at least. 5 legs on the left and 5 more on the right, Then people will stare. They'll say, "What a sight." The zookeeper, new keeper Gerald's quite keen. "That's the gall darnest lion I've ever seen." My new zoo, the McGrew Zoo, will make people talk. My new zoo, the McGrew Zoo, will make people gawk at the strangest odd creatures that ever did walk. I'll get, for my zoo, a new sort of hen, who roosts in another hen's topknot, and then another one roosts in the topknot of his, and another in his, and another in his, and so forth and upward and onward. Gee whiz. But that's just a start. I'll do better than that. They'll see me next day in my zookeeper hat, coming into my zoo with an elephant cat. They'll be so surprised they'll all swallow their gum. They'll ask, when they see my strange animals come, "Where do you suppose he gets things like that from? His animals all have such very odd faces. I bet he must hunt them in rather odd places." "And that's what I'll do," said young Gerald McGrew. "If you want to catch beasts you don't see every day, you have to go to places quite out of the way. You have to go places no others can get to. You have to get cold and you have to get wet too. Up past the North Pole where the frozen winds squeal, I'll go up and I'll hunt in my Skegel-mobile and bring back a family of what do you know. And that's how my new zoo, McGrew Zoo, will grow. I'll hunt in the mountains of Zomba Matant, with helpers who all wear their eyes at a slant, and capture a fine fluffy bird called the bustard, who only eats custard with sauce made of mustard, and also a very fine beast called the flustered, who only eats mustard with sauce made of custard. I'll catch them in caves and I'll catch them in brooks. I'll catch them in crannies, I'll catch them in nooks that you don't read about in geography books. I'll catch them in countries that no one can spell, like the country of Mata Fa Pata Fa Pel. In a country like that, if a hunter is clever, he'll hunt up some beasts that you never saw ever. I'll load up 5 boats with a family of jotes, whose feet are like cows but wear squirrel skin coats, and sit down like dogs but have voices like goats, expecting they can't sing the very high notes. And I'll go down to the wilds of Nantucket and capture a family of lunks in a bucket, and people will say, "Now I like that boy heaps. His new zoo, McGrew Zoo, is growing by leaps. He captures them wild and he captures them meek. He captures them slim and he captures them sleek. What do you suppose he will capture next week?" I'll capture one tiny, I'll capture one cute. I'll capture a deer that no hunter would shoot. A deer that's so nice he could sleep in your bed, if it weren't for those horns that he has on his head. And speaking of horns that are just a bit queer, I'll bring back a family of very odd deer, a father, a mother, 2 sisters, a brother, whose horns are connected from one to the other, whose horns are so mixed they can't tell them apart, can't tell where they end and can't tell where they start. Each deer is mighty puzzled. He's never yet found if his horns are hers or the other way round. I'll capture them fat and I'll capture them scrawny. I'll capture a scraggle-foot mulligatawny, a high-stepping animal fast as the wind, from the blistering sands of the desert of Zinde. The beast is the beast that brave chieftains ride when they want to go fast and find some place to hide. A mulligatawny is fine for my zoo, and so is a chieftain. I'll bring one back too. In the far western part of southeast North Dakota lives a very fine animal called the iota, but I'll capture one who is even much finer in the northeastern west part of South Carolina. When people see him, they will say, "Now by thunder, this new zoo, McGrew Zoo, is really a wonder." Most beasts are quite friendly, but still in some lands, some beasts are too dangerous to catch with bare hands. For those that are ugly and vicious and mean, I'll build a bad animal catching machine. It's rather expensive to build such a kit, but with it a hunter can never get bit. And then I'll go out and I'll capture some chugs, some keen shooter, mean shooter, bean shooter bugs. A zoo should have bugs, so I'll capture a thwirl, whose legs are snarled up in a terrible snarl. I'll go to the African islands of Yurka and bring back a sizzle-top tufted mazurka, a kind of canary with quite a tall throat. His neck is so long, if he swallows an oat for breakfast the first day of April, they say, it has to go down a very long way, that it gets to his stomach on the 15th of May. I'll bag a big bug, who is very surprising, a feller who has a propeller for rising and zooming around making cross-country hops, from Texas to Boston with only 2 stops. Now that sort of thing for a bug is just tops. And when I've caught him, the next thing you'll know, I'll go and capture a wild tic-tac-toe. With X's that win and zeros that lose, he'll look mighty good in this zoo of McGrews. I'll bring back a gusset, a gherkin, a gasket, and also a gooch from the wilds of Nantasket. And 8 Persian princes will carry the basket. But what their names are I don't know, so don't ask it. In a cave-in cart room lives a beast called the Natch, that no other hunter's been able to catch. He's hidden for years in his cave with a pout, and no one's been able to make him come out. But I'll coax him out with a wonderful meal that's cooked by my cooks in my cooker-mobile. They'll fix up a dish that is just to his taste, 3 chicken croquettes made of library paste, then sprinkled with peanut shucks, pickled and spiced, then baked at 600 degrees and then iced. It's mighty hard cooking to cook up such feasts, but that's how the new zoo, McGrew Zoo, gets beasts. I'll go to the faraway mountains of Tosk, near the river of Nosp, and bring back an osp, a sort of a kind of a thingamabox, who only eats rhubarb and corn on the copse. Then people will flock to my zoo in a mobs. McGrew, they will say, does a wonderful job. He hunts with such vim and he hunts with such vigor. His new zoo, the McGrew Zoo, gets bigger and bigger. And speaking of birds, there's a Russian Paluski, whose headski is redski and whose belly is blueski. I'll get one of them for my Zooski McGrewski. Then the whole town will gasp, why this boy never sleeps. No keeper before ever kept what he keeps. There's no telling what this young fellow will do. And then, just to show them, I'll sail to Catrue, and bring back an it clutch, a nurgle, a nerd, a preep and a prue, and a seersucker too. I'll hunt in the jungles of Hippo no Hungus, and bring back a wild flock of Bippo no Bungus. The Bippo no Bungus from Hippo no Dungus are better than those down in Dippo no Dungus, and smarter than those out in Nippo no Nungus, and that's why I'll catch 'em in Hippo no Hungus, instead of those others in Ningus and Dungus. And people will say, when they see these bips bounding, the zookeeper, the new keeper, is simply astounding. He travels so far you'd think he would drop. When do you suppose this young fellow will stop? Stop? Well, I should, but I won't stop until I've captured the Frizama Wizamadil, the world's biggest bird from the island of Gwark, who only eats pine trees and spits out the bark. And boy, when I get him back home to my park, the whole world will say young McGrew's made his mark. He's built a zoo better than Noah's whole ark. These wonderful, marvelous beasts that he chooses have made him the greatest of all the McGrewses. Wow, they'll all cheer. What this zoo must be worth. It's the gall-darnest zoo on the face of the earth. Yes, that's what I'd do, said young Gerald McGrew. I'd make a few changes if I ran the zoo. Those were a couple short stories that made their way across my desk. The first one was The Big Cruton, written by Bruce McCullough. And of course, If I Ran the Zoo, by Dr. Seuss. Both very important works of literature in their own right, because 7-year-old me really wanted to find that crouton shack. But I'll tell you about it next time. Because this has been Doctorpiece Theatre. My name is Dr. Dennis Business. And as always, my friends,